Joining us in the studio now is junior doctor Bhasha Mukherjee, and thank you for being with us today. I'm just looking at the numbers a little bit. 6% is the average. Junior doctors are getting anything between 8.1 and 10.3% pay rises, depending where they are in training. Isn't that enough?
I'm not a numbers person. I think that's why the BMA are doing a really grand job of doing the calculations, and this has been a calculation made over, as you've just heard, 15 years of cutbacks. We've been offered 2% rise with a 9% inflation, and that actually puts it at a minus, isn't it? So.
But Bhasha, you say you're not a numbers person. Is that the problem? I mean, I don't mean to be impolite, but is that the problem? Because is it the case that perhaps junior doctors and the BMA are a little bit out of touch with the current economic landscape? Most people are not going to be getting 35% pay increases. Most people are down in real terms with their wages. That is the state of play. You can blame the government for that, you can blame lockdown for that, you can blame whatever you like for that, but that is where we are currently. And 8.1 to 10.3% or 6% average is pretty reasonable. That is where the private sector is too.
I think it's a case of this hasn't happened overnight. This has happened over years of mistakes made, I guess, by the government in terms of where they've spent the money, and this is why we're at where we're at. The NHS is where it's at because of whatever's been happening over the years, and I think it won't be an overnight solution as well. Ultimately, it's something, we're seeing a lot of doctors leave the country, 10,000 doctors every year leave the NHS. And that's really sad because all these people are graduating out of medical school and, taking the loans and not paying their loans back effectively. So you're still losing money one way or another. So you're losing the quality of doctors. It takes a lot more money to, fill the gaps essentially and fill the gaps in quality of care and everything else. It's basic corrective action. I mean, we all know that prevention is better than cure.
Are you planning to leave the NHS?
It's definitely something I have considered and thought about and looked into the options. I'm currently in the process of getting my GP qualifications, and I'm definitely thinking about what my options are abroad.
It's interesting because one of the big countries that people talk about is Australia.
Yeah.
Which actually, the Australian government spends less on their healthcare than the British government does per person. The difference is made up. They have a much larger private sector. If you're someone on a high income, you are encouraged by the government to take out private insurance. You have a surcharge added to your tax bill if you don't take out private insurance. You're punished by the government if you don't have... And that puts way more private money into the health system, which means that they can afford these bigger pay packets for medical professionals. Is that something we should consider doing here?
It's not just about the money, it's actually also about the quality of the work environment as well, both for the patients who are accessing the care and also people who work in it. I mean, a lot of people say, the waiting lists and, 8-hour waiting lists in A&E, it's shocking. But you have to understand, what is it like to work in that environment as well? It's not pleasant. We don't want to be putting patients at risk and, and working with a relentless list that just doesn't end. And by the time you're seeing your patients, they're much worse than they'd been seen a bit earlier. And we're having to basically every day fight an uphill battle to try to combat the cost of losing our doctors.
On that, though, we don't hear very often, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe we hear very often from the BMA and other unions about how the NHS could do things better, how it can be sustainable for the future. We see the threats of strike action over pay and working conditions, but what could actually make the NHS better? Because, of course, neither Tom or I or anyone at home wants to see junior doctors leaving and abandoning our health service.
It's a really difficult question because I can tell you from being a frontliner, or whatever you want to call us, the nurses, the clinical staff, and that's the extent of my knowledge, the clinical staff, they are stretched to the absolute limit. There is no way they could possibly do any better because we're already overstretched, taking up
so you wonder if
other...
because no one would doubt the hard work that is put in by the people who work in the system. The question then becomes, at what point is the system working against the people? Doctors having to fill in too many forms, you know, the way in which this stuff is structured. Can we learn from countries in continental Europe? Can we learn from Australia? Can we learn from Canada in the way they run their health systems?
100%. There's something to be learned from each culture, and I would definitely say it's a very bureaucratic system, and in terms of the weight of paperwork, and we're definitely in a very defensive medicine practice where we're having to do everything to make sure we don't get in trouble, rather than trying to do what the best thing is for the patient.
Just very, very quickly, would you give up some of your pension in order to have more upfront pay day to day?
Well, that wasn't the question asked of the people working 15 years ago. They had equal, I mean, they had better sort of overall, holistic sort of, you know, whether it was pay matching up to the inflation as well as the pension. So it's unfair to be asking us to give up things, and they were paying less in university fees.
We'll see what people at home think. Do you think perhaps pensions could be cut in order to boost pay day to day? Because, of course, the NHS workers do receive very generous pensions.
Well, or we could drive for greater efficiency, get rid of some of that paperwork, make the lives of doctors easier if they're doing twice as much work in the same time, because they don't have to fill in out endless forms.
Better IT systems.
Better IT. Stop using pagers, as we were hearing from Maxwell Marlowe a little bit earlier. The 1970s computers that some hospitals still run on. I mean, my goodness. But so much to talk about in this subject. And thank you so much for coming in to talk about a junior doctor's perspective as well.